Welcome to John's Post-Life Crisis. I am John Johnston, founder of CornNation.com, your Nebraska Cornhusker site of wondering about basketball season. Let's not wonder too long. Today we're joined by Christopher Novak, site manager of TeamSpeedKills, the SB Nation site that represents all of the SEC conference and all of its evil. And we're here today to talk about the upcoming title game between Alabama and Ohio State. Christopher, why don't you give us an introduction about yourself and how you got to be, how you came to the dark side and chose evil over light and goodness. And
Yeah, so originally I'm from New Jersey. I grew up in a town called Bridgewater. It's about 45 minutes from New York City, about an hour and a half from Philadelphia. It's kind of right in the middle of the state of New Jersey. And I know that, I recognize this is the Nebraska site. And I know this may, rattle a few cages. I went to Mizzou. I graduated there in 2015. I started there in 2010. So the last 2 years that they were there, they weren't the 1 year wasn't so pleasant in 2010. Roy Halou still gives me a little bit of nightmares. I know that'll probably pop the crowd here. But they went to the SEC in 2012, and from there, I'd always it's an interesting thing for me with college football. Growing up in the Northeast, it really wasn't as popular as college hoops was. And I myself wasn't so catered to it, but I had watched the Ohio State Miami national championship game in 2002, 2003, and that kind of turned me on to the sport. And from there, it was kind of off to the races. I started playing, the NCAA football games. I started, being more into the sports. I joined some message boards and whatnot, not like, anything like, Orange Bloods or anything. I was on I talked about it on some sport forums and some IGM boards as well. So I got more immersed in. By the time I was at Mizzou, I was really into it, and I've continued on that way. And I wanted to write about it. So how I got to TeamSpeedKills, the old site manager Brandon, I believe his last name was Larrabee. I hope I didn't butcher that. He was looking for some writers in the fall of 2013, and I had done some fan posts there first for basketball, and then that kind of took off from there. I was there for 2 years, and then back in 2016, I believe it was, the summer of 2016, I had taken the reins as site manager of TeamSpeedKills, and since then, I've had a blast writing for them and running the site.
okay, so you went to Mizzou and you're in the SEC, which makes you like doubly evil squared.
Yeah. Just a bit, yeah.
So
a little all over the place.
I was going to start with the national title game, but I do want to. What did you think about Mizzou's transition to the SEC? I mean, Nebraska went off and joined the Big Ten, and we became part of this. Oh my God, we're the best academics ever, and we care about all the student athletes. And you guys went off and joined the SEC. I mean, that had to be culture shock for you too, or not?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think that there were people who wanted Mizzou to join the Big Ten from out there because there were a lot of people. Mizzou gets a lot of enrollees and students from Chicago and everything. So there's always a lot of people there who have Illinois roots or Northwestern roots and whatnot. But when they joined the SEC, I think people, myself included, were a little skeptical on how they would be able to transition, just because by then the SEC was entering its prime as the top conference in America, and I don't know if Mizzou was necessarily, at least from the outsider perspective, was necessarily built for that. But they obviously they proved some people wrong in year 2 and year 3 when they went to the SEC title game. Since then, it's been a little skittish and whatnot. But I think all things considered, it's been a pretty beneficial move for them. I don't think there's really any regret there. There's no real buyer's remorse. And obviously under Eli Drinkwitz, their first year this past season, they did what they could, and they showed some promise and prowess offensively. Defensively, they had Nick Bolton and other players. They did pretty well. So, yeah, that's how I viewed it from my perspective. There was little bit of skepticism and doubt, but they were able to get over that hump, and now they're just kind of, looking for that next step that they need to take.
Okay, for the purposes of this episode, you have to represent Alabama. Do you feel comfortable doing that?
Mm-hmm.
I have to start with this question. Do the Alabama people scare the living shit out of you?
Honestly, from what I've dealt with, they've been pretty easygoing. You gotta know, what to say, because even as a conference blog, you have to try and play to everybody. You can't be too heavily lenient towards one side, because then you'll upset one fan base, and then another fan base could get upset. So you got to try and play things as even Steven as possible.
Wow. So I imagine, I try to be fair to most of the rest of the Big Ten. No, I really don't. I hate Iowa. And I mean, they took your place as the black and gold team to hate. Well, Colorado too, but you know what I mean? Iowa, everybody hates them. Anyway, do you think that Ohio State, let's get right into the national title stuff. Do you think Ohio State has any chance of beating Alabama?
I do think they have a chance, but I think the two things are going to need to happen. One, they're going to need to win the battles up front. Obviously, Bama has a really strong line on both sides of the ball. And, I think Ohio State is going to have to try and tame the beasts on their O-line and defensively trying to, pressure and get to Mac Jones and whatnot. And number two, I think they're going to need another really, really great outing from Justin Fields. Fields, of course, he had that great game against Clemson. He was a bit banged up during it, but he still was able to perform tremendously against the Tigers. So if Ohio State's to win, I think those two things need to happen. But because I think that they do have the talent and the horses to be able to keep up with Bama's top flight offense. You have Chris Olave, you have Trey Sermon, Fields himself is great. And there's other assortment of talented players that they have. But, obviously you go down the list with Bama, you have Mac Jones, Najee Harris, Devonta Smith, the Heisman Trophy winner, Miller Forrestall, their tight end, as well as John Mechie. I could go on and on right now. But yeah, it's really all about, I think, those two things: Fields and winning in the trenches.
Has anybody put pressure on Mac Jones all season?
It hasn't seemed that way. Bama's O-line has been able to keep him really clean. There hasn't really been a situation where they've been able to, where they've had to really fight. They get out to big leads. Their toughest matchup in the first half was against Georgia. Interestingly enough, that was the last time that they also weren't able to cover a first half spread. They've covered every spread since then. So they just jump out to big leads, and then they're just able to, keep the foot on the gas or just, stalwart these other teams. And this is not, one of the, it's a talented defense, obviously, but this isn't, the defenses of the early 2010s. This is an offensive lenient team that just gets out to big leads, and then they just, they continue to kill you with talent every time that they're on the field.
So when you watch Najee Harris play, I don't know what to compare him to, because to me, he's a freak. I know that Smith won the Heisman, but when I watch Harris play, I think it's like watching a Marvel superhero. It's like not fair. It's almost like he's not human. And has anybody been able to slow him down? I know he's only part of the offense, but has anybody stopped him? Anybody held him in check at all?
Yeah, I mean, Harris has been awesome. He's been a touchdown machine this year. He's got over 20. He's got 24, actually, to be precise. I mean, his lowest output was 46 yards against Arkansas, but they still were able to win 52-3 in that game. And then 43 yards against A&M, but they still blew out A&M by 28 points. So even when he's tamed, it's like it doesn't matter just because of everyone else that they have. But yeah, Harris is pretty ridiculous. That hurdle that he had against Notre Dame made me loudly yelp, audibly so. He's turned himself into a really, really good player. Another, one in a long line of great Alabama backs. And I think that the only thing that would worry me about him going into the future is just how many touches he's had. He's going to probably finish with almost 700 by the time he leaves college, which is a lot to say the very least. And that includes carries and receptions, but doesn't seem to be slowing him down against college competition. That's for sure.
All right. And Mac Jones, we talked about whether or not anybody's been able to get to him. Is there any weaknesses in him? Anything? I mean, he's not a mobile quarterback, but he is.
No, he's kind of he's kind of a good quintessential QB for Bama, but I think he's a little bit more elevated than the guys that they had in the early 2010s, like AJ McCarron and Blake Sims, and Jake Coker. He's been able to be really proficient. His completion percentage, is up there. He's got 36 TDs to just four interceptions, thrown for over 4,000 yards, second most passing yards in the country. And nearly, every game, it's pretty much the same. He'll complete a high volume of passes. He'll throw for a lot of yards. He'll play clean games in terms of not committing turnovers. So yeah, I mean, he's been terrific for them, really. He's no Tua Tagovailoa, but no one really is. So.
and Smith, why did he? Obviously, the output was there with Smith. Why did he win the Heisman Trophy? Just because of output, or is he? I guess when I watch him, he doesn't strike me as an elite athlete per se, but then again, he makes all these plays. What makes him special?
Smith will not wow you with his explosiveness like a Jalen Waddle would be, but he is just so technically sound. He's a smooth route runner. He'll do everything that you need, like for tangibles for wide receivers. He can do. He won't blow you away with his speed and his explosiveness, but he will beat you on routes. He will get separation, and when he gets the ball, he'll be able to. There's a difference between they say it all the time. There's speed, there's game speed. His 40 might not be up in the elevated when the combine comes around, but he'll beat you on the field, and that's really all that matters. But yeah, I get why you wouldn't necessarily be wowed by him, but everything that he does technically, from a technical standpoint, is just amazing. So I think that's part of why he was able to win the Heisman. And really, after they lost Waddle, he was able to step up and just be the cog in the offense. They really didn't lose a step without him. So, which says a lot, I think, not only just about the raw talent that Bama has, but just the kind of special talent that Smith is, that he was able to shoulder that load and just, break away from the pack and just, become the first Heisman winner who was a receiver since Desmond Howard back in '91.
So you mentioned Waddle, Jalen Waddle. Is he going to play?
Yeah, I've been seeing whispers about that. I think that would be insane, to be honest. But his teammates are saying that he looks good in practice. I mean, if he was to play, that would be pretty amazing considering how bad his injury looked earlier this year. But I mean, if that happens, I know I said before that Ohio State does have the horses, but I don't know how capable he would be, but Waddle would do enough, I think, to garner attention from the defense of Ohio State to prove to be effective in that regard.
So nobody talks that much about Alabama's defense. That's just because the offense has been so prolific, or their defense isn't as good as it's been in the past, or I mean, they've given up points throughout the year, but
yeah, like I was saying, this obviously is not the defense of the past and they're still in the top 15 in points per game allowed. They're still doing some good things on defense and whatnot. I think an area where there's quote unquote weakness is how many yards they give up on the ground, which is about a little over 110, but they're still only allowing 3.2 yards per carry, which is a big strength. They're only allowing 5 yards per play as well. So those are some good deeper numbers there. And while they have the defensive prowess of other teams, there's still obviously a lot of talent there. There's linebacker Christian Harris, Dylan Moses, who's been going through a lot in his road to recovery. I know he had a really emotional Instagram post that he had posted the other day about his struggles and his road back here, and how this year's been really trying for him. And, obviously they have Patrick Surtain II, who's going to be an NFL cornerback next year. He did amazing work in the Notre Dame game, helping to keep, them pretty much out of the passing game, as well as their other DBs that they have. So yeah, I think this is obviously a step below the typical Bama defense, but they're still doing enough to be able to get by, and still ranking in those top percentiles in yards per play and points per game allowed.
So when have you looked at Ohio State very much? From a standpoint of looking at their players and what you think about them as a football team?
Could you repeat that real quick? Sorry about that.
Have you looked at Ohio State very much? I mean, your position on Ohio State?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've watched them a few times. I wasn't necessarily like blown away by what they did in the Big Ten title game, but I think that was a case where they were shorthanded. They were without Olave, and I know people were doing the most in terms of saying what they were saying about Justin Fields and whatnot. But I think that this is a team that you have to really kind of measure with what you see in terms of their raw talent that they have. They may not have been able to show it because of the shortened season, but this is a really good and capable team.
So let's go on that track for a couple of questions. Dabo Swinney made a big deal about Ohio State not playing that many games, and he didn't think they should be there. And he ranked them 11th, and they kind of kicked his butt. Do you think that he made that big a deal because he didn't want to see Ohio State in the playoffs, or do you think that he had a legitimate gripe?
I think that he may have had a legitimate gripe, but this was a season where the committee had made up their mind from the start, it seemed like, and they weren't going to change it. So I think that everything else just kind of falls short. So it kind of just is what it is, really.
Okay, from a guy who's not in the Big Ten and looks at our conference, kind of like maybe not how I look at the SEC, because I think you're all insane. I don't know. Maybe you think that about the Big Ten.
Yeah, no. I mean, I like I said, I try and look at everything on a pretty level playing field, to be honest.
Okay, the Big Ten changed the rule to allow Ohio State to get into the Big Ten championship game. Do you think that was a bad, good, indifferent?
I think it obviously I don't know if necessarily there should have been a season in general, just because of how things have played themselves out. But it was to be expected to see the power brokers of the Big Ten continue to try and move the goalposts, because they like the committee, they look out for themselves. They look out to serve their own interests. So if the Big Ten wanted to do that, it may look sour to everybody else, but from their perspective, I get it. I understand. It kind of just is what it is. There's nothing really like anybody can really do about it if they're just going to go about their business that way, I feel.
If I make this statement, Nebraska brought back Big Ten football. React to that.
That's they've been the butt of every joke this year. So I mean, it is a humorous statement to me. So, but that is what it is.
You don't think it's true?
I do.
I'm trying to drag you into this abyss, and you're not going willingly.
That's funny. That's funny.
Okay. What else we got? What else can we say about Alabama versus Ohio State? Any kind of prediction? Yeah. Well, let's do this. Yesterday, there was a brief moment in time on Twitter in which there was a rumor or a tweet or somebody said that Ohio State had COVID issues and was looking at delaying the game. And of course, Twitter explodes with they're making excuses so Justin Fields can heal. Apparently Nick Saban's daughter got in on the action. Talk about that. Explain your position on that for a bit.
That was a whole mess. I think that that was wrong of that person to say, because clearly there was immediate backlash, and then there was immediate backlash to that woman's apology. So yeah, my position was that was just a wrong thing to say, but that was a whole mess that just billowed out of control.
It was so quick. It was like a flash. I mean, it
Yep.
happened, and then like an hour later, it was over and done. And that's the thing about Twitter. If you're not there, you're missing stuff, which I think
Yep.
possibly sometimes isn't such a bad thing if you just let things go by. But it certainly is fun being there when stuff like that happens. All right, should I make you do a prediction?
Sure.
Well, have at it.
I will say that Ohio State will be able to keep up with Bama for probably the first half, but then I think that Bama is going to be able to pull away. I see it being score of about 38-28 in favor of Alabama, and then they win the national championship.
Okay, one of the jokes I've made this year is that Alabama, if they win this game, they're going to claim 10 national titles. Because this year has felt like a decade. We all know that Alabama just claims national titles, kind of like any validity to this.
Yeah.
Claiming 10 national titles.
Yep.
All right. Is there anything else you want to say in defense of Alabama that I haven't brought up?
No. I mean, we pretty much touched every base here.
I from the Ohio State guys, I'll tell you this, from the Ohio State guy, and I'll do an interview with him hopefully tomorrow morning. One of the Ohio State guys that I stay in touch with to try to figure out what's going on with the Buckeyes. I think if you looked at them when they have bad games, an example is Purdue, like I think last year, well, whatever, Purdue killed them, slaughtered them. Iowa slaughtered them both years, kept them from the national title games. And if you look at what went wrong in those Ohio State games, they had a targeting penalty called on one of their players, Chase Young, I think it was, in one of those games, and things just spun out of control. Penalties, when they do poorly, they start, it's like something, the bottom falls out for them, and they start committing penalties after penalties after penalties. And those, I believe those things happened under Urban Meyer. Ryan Day's a little bit different of a coach. I think he's more even keeled than Urban Meyer is. I think that they made the right choice in having him take over that program, because they're just going to stay the juggernaut. One more thing before I go. When we look at these two conferences, there was a statement made by a lot of national people that said the Big Ten was down this year. For me personally, that what that means is these are writers who look at Penn State and Michigan to be top teams, and both those teams were terrible this year. Northwestern had an incredible defense, and nobody is ever going to give nerds any credit whatsoever.
Yeah.
But when we look at these two conferences, I mean, you have Ohio State and everybody else in the Big Ten. You have Alabama, and you really have everybody else in the SEC, or is that not true? Because you see like Kellen Mond make a tweet, quarterback for Texas A&M, make a tweet that Ohio State couldn't go through the SEC without a loss. I think that is overblown. Your position on that? Is the SEC top to bottom that much better than everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely some perception biases at play. I think that, and that's not to say that I think the SEC is, on the whole overrated. There's obviously some great programs there. But, you look at, at the teams in the conference, there's certain teams that, have their peaks and they've hit them. And there's other teams that kind of, just coast, that go on by. They're maybe expected to do a little more, and then they don't. And then there's teams that just, lie in the bottom. And would they be better than, the worst of the Big Ten? It's hard to say because they don't match up that often. But, I think that I think that you need to try and look at things as fairly as possible. And I think that the SEC has just as many I don't want to call them necessarily bottom feeders. But there's just as much teams that struggle as much as the teams of the Big Ten do. And I think there's definitely a bias at play just based on how things have played out over the years with all the SEC teams winning national championships. The conference was able to strike good deals to be get exposure to the masses. The only game on CBS every week. ESPN is always touting them and whatnot, putting them in primetime spots. The Big Ten, they have Fox and they have the ESPN games too, but there's obviously a difference in how those messages are able to be sent, and I think that it's foolish to say otherwise. And I'm not saying there's like a conspiracy or anything like that, but every conference and every network, they have their own agendas and they have their own ways of touting them and putting over teams and getting through that as well. Like, I mean, in the case of like Georgia and Florida being in the top 10 and being ahead of a team like Cincinnati, I know Georgia was able to best Cincinnati, but Florida, they were a really good squad. It's not to diminish them, but like they lost to one of the worst LSU teams in recent memory, and they were still ahead of a team like Cincinnati, who was able, quite frankly, if they don't fold to Georgia, they would have won. And they played, round for round with a team that not only is one of the best in the SEC in terms of the blue chip ratio of how much raw talent there is on that team. They're one of the top 3 teams in the country in that regard, and they were able to hang with them. And I think that says a lot about them. And I think that's obvious, more just bias in play. And Big Ten teams probably wouldn't get that benefit of the doubt.
Okay, so since we'll stay with the SEC, the conference, who scares you more as a fan base, Florida or Texas A&M?
Texas A&M is definitely one of the louder ones, I would say. Because me personally, I didn't think that they really had much of a claim to the the 4th spot, because they got housed by Alabama anyway by 28. And I know that they did win all those SEC games, but I knew better than I needed to play it kind of evenly there. So I was just like, okay, I'll say whatever I want on my own personal account. On the TSK account, I'll just retweet things. I'll just do what I got to do.
So that's what I'm getting at. You have to toe this line between all these people. Which ones are you most afraid in the SEC conference that'll actually show up at your door?
I've obviously, and this is, I guess, no surprise, I've enjoyed communicating with Mizzou people. I find that Tennessee people have been pretty easygoing, despite their struggles over the years. I find that, like I said, I've had no real issues with the Bama and Auburn people, and even Auburn people either. Georgia, they're pretty okay. I think they're mostly frustrated with their current situation, and I don't necessarily blame them for wanting more. But yeah, I mean, I don't wait as much as I want to in basketball, but I'd imagine if that were the case, I'd probably have to deal with more Kentucky fans, and I haven't really felt their wrath ever. So that is what it is there, though. So.
All right. Anything else? Anything else you want to say to mostly Nebraska fans? Do you miss us?
I'll be honest. Even as someone who was it's a Mizzou graduate, if there ever is an opportunity, I would love to go to Lincoln. I would love to go to Memorial Stadium. I would love to watch a game there. It seems like it's a good time. The crowds always seem very lively. I went to school. There were 2 people who were on my floor who were from Nebraska. One was from Omaha. The other was from around the Lincoln area. She had people who were, volleyball players in Nebraska, as well as friends and or siblings as well. So I've had good interactions with them, and I've always kind of, looked at Nebraska as like, oh, cool, this would be a fun spot to watch a game go down. So, and in addition to that, I've had encounters with people from Creighton through my work through the Big East basketball website for SB Nation as well. So I've always wanted to go there too for a hoops game. So Nebraska's always just been kind of a state that there's reasons for me to get there. I just haven't been able to, even while being in Missouri right now.
All right. Well, we're going to go. And I have never, one of the things I took like a week and a half off of doing interviews. So I'm already getting rusty and I'm never good at closings anyway. But I think we'll end it there. And this has been John's Post-Life Crisis with Christopher Novak of TeamSpeedKills.com, the SEC conference site you want to go to check out what's going on in that conference full of really reasonable human beings from what we found out today. So thank you for listening, and I hope y'all having fun. Take care and go Big Red.